we are here to address a very important issue, the issue of Roma security. This is, I think, the first ever online discussion on this particular topic. As you know, on 30th of June, our coalition sent a letter to the European Commission on the security of Roma people in Europe in relation to the new internal strategy of the European Union, where protection of Jewish and Muslim communities is mentioned, but not even a word is mentioned about Roma people. And we are 12 million people in the European Union, in Europe, Europe's largest minority according to the European Commission itself. The Roma issue is disappearing from the official documents of the European institutions. That's a very worrying tendency, and that's why it's important to address these issues and to prioritize the security. After sending the letter, there were some developments, as you know, some statements from other organizations like the Roma Foundation for Europe. But unlike our letter, they claim that the Roma exclusion poses a threat to Europe's security. In this regard, the chief editor of Euroma Press, Muhajir Suleiman, sent a clarification request to Roma Foundation for Europe, and they confirmed they really believe that exclusion of Roma may pose a security threat for European societies, and that's why European institutions, Europe should invest even more money in the so-called Roma inclusion. So this is their claim. Historically, this was the claim of the far right. And after the end of the decade of Roma inclusion in 2015, there were statements, there were articles in Bulgarian and other newspapers that after the failure of the decade of Roma inclusion, radicalization of Roma can be expected. They may even join terrorist groups, especially Roma from the Balkans. This was a very controversial statement. For the first time now, we see such statement coming from a Roma organization, which is quite bizarre, quite strange. But of course, they have their own logic, their own rationale, although we couldn't see what are their arguments in support of this claim. As you know, for many years, for decades, our main focus as human rights defenders was on protection of individual human rights. Probably most of you know, for example, I have experience as a human rights lawyer for almost more than 20 years, but I've spent years in my home country, Bulgaria, fighting for Roma rights, as many of you, I think. So our focus was on the protection of individual human rights, but now is coming a time when we need to shift our focus to protection of collective security of Roma. Anti-Gypsyism is becoming a systemic and institutional problem now. We need to change our perspective, to change our philosophy, because the political climate in Europe is changing and globally in the world is changing. We cannot rely much on the international human rights protection system anymore. You see that the post-World War II legal and political order is falling apart in front of our eyes. You see that the institutions like United Nations are unable to protect the human rights of people in the Middle East and Africa, Rohingya people, Palestinians and others. And we as Roma people need to make some conclusions and to adapt to this new environment, to this new situation in world politics. So instead of talking about the old priorities from the era of the decade of Roma inclusion, which is over, education, healthcare, social inclusion, and so on, we need to prioritize our own security, because without security, we cannot study, work, have normal lives. There is a huge difference between, for example, Jewish organizations in Europe and Roma organizations. Jewish organizations are actively raising the issue of security of Jewish people. And strangely enough, despite of the hundreds of cases of anti-Roma violence from Britain and Spain to the Balkans, our Roma organizations still don't talk about Roma security as a priority issue. And the funds for security, for protection, let's say, of Jewish or Muslim communities have never been extended to Roma. There are no specific measures for protection of Roma and no activities in this regard in European Union, which is, I think, something that we need to raise. Especially now, when the new budget of the European Union is actually focusing on only two main priorities, security and defense. And now we have to see where is the Roma issue in this new financial framework and in this new policy framework. Obviously, Roma are no more represented in the European Parliament. Obviously, Roma cannot rely on diplomatic protection, unlike other minorities. And the ongoing war in Ukraine is especially something that should worry us, because countries like Romania, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Hungary are the countries actually with the largest Roma communities. And in case of involvement of NATO countries in this war, it means that Roma communities will be directly affected by potential military actions. The largest Roma communities are exactly near the border with Ukraine. Eastern Slovakia, Eastern Hungary, for example, are regions with very high concentration of Roma people, Roma settlements, which makes them extremely vulnerable in this scenario. And we have to start thinking about such scenarios, just because the military and political leadership of the European Union is already talking about possible war between NATO and Russia. Kenan made a very good comparison with Yugoslavia case. Before the wars in Yugoslavia, people didn't expect, they didn't have any idea, they didn't imagine that these wars are possible. You know, it was for a lot of people completely unexpected, completely unimaginable, but it happened. So now we live in the European Union. A lot of Eastern European Roma moved to Western Europe, but still large communities remain in this dangerous buffer zone between the West and Russia. This is a very dangerous buffer zone, all the line from Poland to Turkey. And you have compact settlements there, huge settlements of people, from people who are maybe too poor, or for some reason they cannot or they don't want to immigrate. Or maybe they spent some time in Western Europe and they didn't like the life in Western Europe and they returned to their home places. The question is what we can do, how we can prepare. If we have the experience from Yugoslavia and Ukraine already and the experience from the Second World War, we cannot wait for the community to understand what's going on and what we want to do, because it's a matter of time. I'm afraid we don't have this time. In history, there are moments in history when you have to be effective. You have to propose some measures, some steps, even if the others don't understand. You don't wait for permission. You don't wait for democratic mechanisms, institutions, voting, or anything like this. It's a luxury. We don't have this luxury. We are in 2025. We are facing the danger of the war in Ukraine spilling out, involving the surrounding countries. But these countries are in real danger. Our communities are in a real danger. Nobody will care. Nobody will care about Roma people. We know this from experience. In times of crisis, they are just gypsies. This happened during the COVID pandemic. In Bulgaria, the police blocked the big settlements. People were unable to leave, to move freely, only the Roma settlements. In a case of a war, what they will do, they will just send the men to the front. Women and children will remain blocked in the settlements. And even humanitarian aid, it will be difficult to reach these neighborhoods. It will be like mini Gaza, but there will be no Al Jazeera, no public protests in Washington and New York for Roma, nothing like this. Nobody will care. And now the question, Kenan is right, the question is what we do in this situation to prepare for such a scenario, because most of the Roma NGOs are completely inadequate in the current situation. Someone has to propose something different now. I agree with Vicente. We need something different. And I agree with Kenan. We need some kind of structure. We need to think and to move preventatively as intelligent people, taking into consideration the past examples, the past experience from Yugoslavia and Ukraine. What is the lesson for us in 2025? Now we are in an emergency. What we do in the emergency situation, we use all possible ways. As Roma people, we need some kind of plan. We need some kind of strategy, at least some minimum consensus on what's going on, what can happen, what are the scenarios A, B, C, and how we cope. Just try we survive individually, or we try to create some kind of common strategy, putting in the center, the protection of Roma people. When Europe discuss security and defense, Roma don't exist.